When two people are truly meant to be together, it doesn't feel chaotic. It doesn't feel confusing. It doesn't feel like you're constantly guessing where you stand. Instead, there's a quiet sense of rightness even when things aren't perfect. That doesn't mean there are no challenges. It means the connection has a certain stability to it, a foundation you can stand on. And when you look closely at relationships that are meant to last, 4 things are always happening beneath the surface. Emotional safety is one of the clearest signs that two people are truly meant to be together, because it shows up not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, everyday moments where you are allowed to be fully yourself. It's the feeling that you don't have to monitor every word you say or calculate every emotional response. You're not afraid that expressing a concern will turn into an argument or that sharing a fear will be met with dismissal. Instead, there's a calm inner knowing that your emotions are welcome here, even the messy ones. This kind of safety doesn't demand perfection, it allows humanity. When emotional safety comes naturally, you notice how your nervous system responds around the other person. Your body relaxes. Your mind slows down. You're not constantly on alert for signs of rejection or abandonment. You don't feel the need to prove your worth or earn your place. Love doesn't feel like a test you're constantly preparing for. It feels like a space where you're already accepted. That acceptance creates trust. And trust deepens connection in a way that nothing else can. In emotionally safe relationships, honesty doesn't feel risky. You can say, "That hurt me," without worrying that it will be thrown back at you later. You can admit uncertainty, confusion, or vulnerability without feeling weak or exposed. The other person listens not to defend themselves, but to understand you. Even when they don't fully agree, they respect your emotional reality. That respect becomes the glue that holds the relationship together during difficult moments. This safety also means you're not punished for having needs. You don't feel guilty for wanting reassurance, time, affection, or space. Your needs are seen as valid rather than inconvenient. When something feels off, you're able to talk about it instead of suppressing it to keep the peace. Suppression creates distance over time, but emotional safety allows intimacy to deepen because nothing important is being hidden. Another sign of natural emotional safety is how mistakes are handled. In relationships where you're meant to be together, mistakes don't turn into character assassinations. A bad day doesn't redefine the entire relationship. Misunderstandings are approached with curiosity instead of blame. Both people understand that perfection isn't the goal, connection is. This creates an environment where learning and repair are possible, which is essential for long-term love. Emotional safety also shows up in silence. You don't feel pressure to fill every quiet moment or perform emotionally to keep the connection alive. Silence doesn't feel awkward or threatening. It feels comfortable. You can simply exist together without fear that distance is growing. That comfort is a powerful indicator of alignment because it reflects trust at a deeper level than words. When safety is conditional, love feels fragile. You start editing yourself, minimizing your emotions, or staying quiet to avoid conflict. But when safety is natural, you don't have to disappear to stay connected. You're encouraged to show up fully, knowing that the relationship can handle the truth of who you are. Over time, this creates emotional intimacy that isn't forced or rushed, but built steadily through consistency and care. In a truly aligned connection, emotional safety doesn't mean there are no hard conversations. It means hard conversations don't threaten the bond. Discomfort is temporary, but the connection remains intact. You know that even when emotions run high, respect stays present. That knowledge allows both people to lean in instead of pulling away, creating a depth of trust that grows stronger with time. This kind of safety isn't something you have to demand or negotiate endlessly. It's felt. It's shown in how the other person responds when you're vulnerable, how they hold space for your feelings, how they treat your emotional world as something valuable rather than something to manage or avoid. It's in the consistent message that you don't have to be less to be loved, and you don't have to be perfect to belong. Mutual effort without force is one of the strongest indicators that a connection is truly aligned, because it reveals itself in consistency rather than intensity. In relationships where effort is natural, you don't feel like you're constantly initiating, reminding, or convincing the other person to participate. Both people show up because they want to, not because they're afraid of losing the relationship. There's an ease to how things move forward even when life gets busy or circumstances change. When effort is mutual, communication doesn't feel one-sided. You're not the only one reaching out, checking in, or keeping the emotional thread alive. The other person takes initiative in small but meaningful ways. They remember details, follow through on plans, and make time because the connection matters to them. This doesn't come from pressure or ultimatums. It comes from genuine interest and care. The relationship feels like a shared responsibility rather than a solo project. In a forced dynamic, effort often comes with anxiety. You wonder if you're asking for too much or if you're being too available. You question whether pulling back will make the other person step up. But when effort flows naturally, those internal debates disappear. You don't have to strategize your behavior to get basic engagement. The connection grows through mutual desire, not emotional negotiation. This kind of balanced effort also means that support moves in both directions. One person isn't always the listener, the planner, or the emotional anchor. There's a natural rhythm where each person steps in when the other needs support. Sometimes one gives more, sometimes the other does, but over time it balances out. Neither person feels depleted or taken for granted. The relationship becomes a place of replenishment rather than exhaustion. Mutual effort without force creates emotional security because it removes the fear of abandonment through neglect. You're not left guessing whether silence means disinterest. Actions align with words, promises are kept, and when something changes, it's communicated openly rather than avoided. This consistency builds trust, and trust allows both people to relax into the relationship instead of constantly evaluating it. Another sign of natural effort is how problems are handled. When something feels off, both people are willing to address it rather than ignore it. There's a shared understanding that maintaining the relationship requires attention and care. Difficult conversations aren't seen as threats, but as opportunities to strengthen the connection. This willingness to engage prevents resentment from building and keeps the relationship emotionally clean. Effort without force also respects individuality. Neither person feels smothered or controlled. Space is given freely, not as a tactic, but as an expression of trust. Both people understand that independence and connection can coexist. Time apart doesn't create insecurity because the bond isn't dependent on constant reassurance. Instead, the relationship feels stable even when life pulls you in different directions. When effort is mutual, you feel chosen without having to compete. There's no need to prove your worth through overgiving or self-sacrifice. You don't feel like love is something you have to earn repeatedly. The other person invests because they see you as valuable, and that investment is reflected in their actions over time. This kind of dynamic creates a sense of partnership rather than imbalance. You move forward together, making decisions with consideration for each other. The relationship evolves naturally because both people are contributing to its growth. There's momentum without pressure, closeness without control, and commitment without coercion, allowing the connection to deepen in a way that feels steady, intentional, and sustainable. Clarity over confusion is one of the most grounding experiences in a relationship that is truly aligned, because it removes the emotional noise that keeps people stuck in doubt. When clarity is present, you don't spend your time decoding mixed signals or trying to read between the lines. Words and actions match. What is said is supported by what is done. You're not left wondering if interest will suddenly disappear or if care will be withdrawn without explanation. There is a steady sense of knowing where you stand, and that knowing creates emotional calm. In relationships marked by confusion, your mind is constantly working overtime. You replay conversations, analyze tone changes, and question your own perceptions. One day things feel close, the next day distant, and there's no clear reason why. This inconsistency creates anxiety, not because you're insecure, but because the relationship itself is unstable. Clarity eliminates that instability by providing emotional predictability. You don't need constant reassurance because the connection itself is reassuring. When two people are meant to be together, communication may not always be perfect, but it is intentional. If something changes, it's addressed. If space is needed, it's explained. Silence isn't used as a weapon, and distance isn't used as a test. Instead of guessing, you're informed. Instead of assuming, you're included. This openness prevents small misunderstandings from turning into emotional wounds. Clarity also shows up in how commitment is expressed. You don't have to ask where the relationship is going every few weeks. The direction is visible through consistent behavior. Plans extend into the future. Decisions are made with consideration for the relationship. You feel like part of the other person's life, not an accessory that can be set aside when convenient. That sense of inclusion creates emotional stability and trust. Another powerful aspect of clarity is how boundaries are handled. In aligned relationships, boundaries are communicated rather than enforced through withdrawal. If something doesn't feel right, it's spoken out loud. This prevents resentment from building beneath the surface. You're not expected to guess what the other person needs or wants. Clear communication replaces emotional guesswork, making the relationship feel safer and more respectful. Clarity doesn't mean there are no doubts or fears. It means those doubts don't come from the other person's behavior. Life uncertainty may still exist, but the relationship itself doesn't add to that uncertainty. You're not questioning whether affection is real or whether connection will suddenly vanish. The emotional ground beneath you feels solid, allowing you to focus on connection rather than survival. In relationships with clarity, conflict doesn't create panic. Disagreements are uncomfortable, but they don't threaten the bond. You know that one difficult conversation won't undo everything. That security allows you to speak honestly instead of avoiding issues out of fear. You're not walking on eggshells because the relationship isn't fragile. Confusion often keeps people emotionally hooked through inconsistency, but clarity creates attachment through trust. It allows love to deepen without anxiety. You don't have to shrink yourself to maintain connection or overextend yourself to feel valued. The relationship doesn't rely on emotional highs and lows to feel alive. It feels steady, grounded, and real. When clarity is present, you experience peace more often than emotional turbulence. You feel seen, considered, and respected. The relationship supports your emotional well-being instead of draining it. You're able to show up fully because you're not preoccupied with uncertainty or self-doubt, and that freedom allows connection to grow naturally through honesty, consistency, and shared understanding rather than unanswered questions and emotional guessing. Growth is encouraged, not resisted, when two people are truly meant to be together, because the relationship becomes a space where evolution feels safe instead of threatening. You don't feel like you have to stay the same version of yourself to remain loved. As you learn more about who you are, what you need, and what you value, the connection adjusts rather than collapses. There is an understanding that growth is a natural part of life, and love is meant to move with it, not against it. In aligned relationships, personal development doesn't create distance, it creates curiosity. When one person starts setting healthier boundaries, pursuing a new passion, or becoming more emotionally aware, the other doesn't feel left behind or diminished. Instead, they feel inspired or supportive. Growth is seen as an expansion of the relationship, not a threat to it. There is no subtle punishment for changing or becoming stronger. When growth is resisted, it often shows up as control. One person may feel uncomfortable when the other gains confidence, independence, or clarity. But when you are meant to be together, there is no need to dim your light to preserve the bond. You are encouraged to step into your full potential because your growth enhances the connection rather than weakening it. The relationship becomes a place where both people can rise without fear of abandonment. Encouraged growth also means emotional maturity is welcomed. You can reflect on your patterns, acknowledge your triggers, and take responsibility for your reactions without being made to feel wrong for it. The other person doesn't use your self-awareness against you. Instead, there is mutual respect for the effort it takes to evolve. Difficult conversations become opportunities to understand each other more deeply rather than moments to assign blame. This kind of relationship supports learning through experience. Mistakes aren't used as evidence that someone is flawed beyond repair. They are seen as part of the human process. Apologies are met with openness instead of resentment. Repair is valued more than being right. This creates a dynamic where both people are willing to try, fail, and try again, without fear of losing love in the process. Growth being encouraged also shows up in how future goals are handled. Dreams aren't minimized to maintain comfort. If one person wants more from life, more purpose, more meaning, the other doesn't discourage that desire out of insecurity. Instead, there is space for ambition, curiosity, and self-discovery. The relationship becomes a supportive foundation rather than a limiting structure. When two people are aligned, they understand that growth will sometimes be uncomfortable. Change can bring uncertainty, but that uncertainty is faced together. There is patience during transitions and understanding during shifts. Neither person expects the other to remain static to keep things predictable. Love adapts, evolves, and deepens through change rather than breaking under it. Encouraged growth also strengthens trust. You don't feel monitored or judged as you change. You feel trusted to remain connected even as you evolve. This trust allows authenticity to flourish. You can explore who you are becoming without hiding parts of yourself to keep the relationship intact. Over time, this dynamic creates a bond that feels alive rather than stagnant. Both people feel more themselves within the relationship, not less. The connection supports expansion instead of contraction, allowing love to grow alongside the individuals within it, shaped by mutual respect, emotional safety, and a shared belief that becoming more fully yourself is something to be celebrated, not feared. When conflict leads to understanding rather than disconnection, it becomes a powerful sign that two people are meant to be together because disagreement no longer threatens the bond. Conflict is no longer something to fear or avoid, but something that reveals how safe the connection truly is. In relationships where people are aligned, arguments don't turn into emotional shutdowns or disappearances. They become moments where deeper truth has a chance to surface. In these relationships, conflict is approached with the intention to resolve, not to win. Both people care more about protecting the connection than protecting their ego. This doesn't mean emotions are muted or that difficult feelings don't arise. It means those emotions are expressed without cruelty. Words are chosen with care, even in frustration. There is an unspoken understanding that respect must remain intact, even when opinions differ. When conflict leads to understanding, listening becomes just as important as speaking. Each person makes an effort to truly hear what the other is saying instead of preparing a defense. There is curiosity about the emotional experience behind the words. This curiosity softens tension and allows empathy to replace assumption. Even when perspectives differ, both people feel seen and acknowledged. Another key sign is how quickly repair happens. In aligned relationships, conflict doesn't linger indefinitely. Silence isn't used as punishment. Distance isn't used to regain control. There is a shared desire to return to emotional closeness. Apologies are sincere, not strategic. Accountability is taken without deflection. This ability to repair after tension strengthens trust and deepens intimacy over time. Conflict that leads to understanding also creates emotional safety. You learn that expressing a concern won't cost you the relationship. You don't have to suppress your needs to maintain peace. Knowing that the bond can withstand disagreement allows honesty to flourish. This honesty prevents resentment from building quietly in the background. In relationships where understanding is the outcome, patterns are examined instead of repeated. Conflict becomes feedback. Both people reflect on what triggered the tension and how they can respond differently next time. There is a willingness to grow rather than stay stuck in blame. This reflective process transforms challenges into opportunities for deeper alignment. Another important aspect is emotional regulation. When two people are meant to be together, they recognize when emotions are escalating and take steps to pause rather than explode. They may step back briefly to calm down, but they return to the conversation with intention. Time apart is used to gain clarity, not to create fear or punishment. Conflict that leads to understanding also reinforces commitment. Even in moments of frustration, there is no threat of abandonment. The relationship isn't put on the line during disagreements. This stability allows both people to engage honestly without fear that one argument will undo everything. The bond feels resilient rather than fragile. Over time, this way of handling conflict builds deep trust. You begin to associate challenges with closeness rather than distance. You learn that being real doesn't push the other person away, it brings them closer. The relationship becomes a place where truth is welcomed, not avoided, and where differences don't divide but instead create space for greater understanding, emotional depth, and a stronger connection built through patience, respect, and the shared desire to truly know each other. Commitment feels steady, not uncertain, when two people are truly meant to be together, because it is experienced as a constant presence rather than a question mark. You don't wake up wondering if today will be the day things change without warning. There is a grounded sense of reliability that runs beneath the relationship, even when emotions fluctuate or life becomes unpredictable. This steadiness doesn't come from dramatic promises or constant reassurance. It comes from consistent behavior over time. When commitment is steady, you feel chosen without needing to compete for attention or affection. You don't feel like love can be withdrawn suddenly if you say the wrong thing or have a difficult moment. The relationship doesn't feel fragile. There is an underlying understanding that both people are invested, not just emotionally, but intentionally. Decisions are made with the relationship in mind, and actions reflect a long-term mindset rather than short-term convenience. Uncertain commitment often creates anxiety because it forces one person to stay hyper-aware, constantly monitoring shifts in tone, availability, or effort. But when commitment is steady, that vigilance fades. You're not scanning for signs of withdrawal or preparing yourself for disappointment. Your energy can relax because the connection itself feels dependable. This emotional stability allows love to deepen naturally, without fear-driven attachment. Steady commitment also shows up in how challenges are handled. When problems arise, the focus isn't on escape but on resolution. There is no threat of walking away at the first sign of discomfort. Instead, both people lean in, knowing the relationship is worth protecting. This creates a sense of partnership where obstacles are faced together rather than alone. Another sign of steady commitment is emotional presence. The other person doesn't disappear when things get hard or when emotions become complex. They stay engaged even if they don't have all the answers. Their presence communicates, "I'm here," even when it's not easy. That presence builds trust more powerfully than words ever could. In relationships with steady commitment, the future isn't avoided. It's discussed naturally, without pressure or fear. Plans evolve over time, and there's a sense that both people are moving in the same direction. The future doesn't feel like a forbidden topic or a source of tension. Instead, it feels like something that belongs to both of you. Steady commitment also respects individuality. It doesn't cling or control. There is confidence that connection doesn't require constant proximity. Space doesn't threaten the bond because trust is already established. Independence and togetherness coexist, creating a relationship that feels secure rather than suffocating. When commitment is steady, love feels calm more often than chaotic. Passion still exists, but it isn't fueled by uncertainty. Affection isn't used to compensate for inconsistency. The relationship doesn't rely on emotional highs and lows to feel alive. It feels solid, grounded, and real. This kind of commitment allows vulnerability to deepen because the fear of abandonment is no longer driving behavior. You can show up honestly, knowing the relationship isn't built on conditions or performance. You are valued for who you are, not how perfectly you manage the connection. In the end, steady commitment creates a relationship where love feels like a safe place to land rather than something you're constantly trying to hold on to. It becomes a source of strength rather than stress, allowing both people to build something meaningful with confidence, trust, and a shared sense of purpose that continues to grow over time.